Good day, good evening, and welcome back to another Freshet Friday. I'm your host, Jeff Wheelwright, and we have another exciting episode for you this week, covering local politics, sports stories, and our usual roundup of coming events and favorite stories of the week. Joining us again are Freshet News reporters and founders Mario Bartel, Janis Cleugh, Theresa McManus, and Cornelia Naylor. Happy Good Friday.
Happy
Good
Good Friday
Friday.
to you.
Friday.
Cornelia, I'm going to start with you and a rare municipal budget good news story from Burnaby on this Good Friday. Burnaby appears to have had a little bit of a windfall. Why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah, I was looking through the city agenda, and what popped out to me was a report on city investment income in 2025. I saw the first thing that popped out was that Burnaby in fact, has a $2.08 billion investment portfolio. And I was like, what does this mean? I'd heard about shrinking reserves over the last few years before I started covering city council. And so what this reserve is made, or sorry, what this portfolio is made up of is the reserve that are going to be spent on capital projects are invested in this portfolio before eventually the bills will get paid, but in the meantime, they're investing them. So this year, staff projected a significant decrease in city investment income, interest income, and because of certain atypical and uncertain market conditions. There's tariff-minded Trump administration, growing unaffordability, the whole host of things. There was a new federal government, for example, personal and provincial debt financing concerns, and all kinds of finance lingo that I didn't really understand much of. So they projected a return of 80 million, and that's compared to 107 million in 2024. Instead, they actually got a return of 106 million, 9 million of which is used to offset the city's operating costs, which was great. I got a chance, because I'm not a finance person, I got a chance to talk to the city's Director of Treasury Services, Doug Spindler, who was kind enough to walk me through why there was so much extra money. And what it turns out, Burnaby's got a bit of a history here. So the Municipal Finance Authority is set up with a bunch of different funds that municipalities can invest in. And Burnaby actually worked with that authority for about 3 years to set up a fund that would allow them to sort of diversify. It's called the Diversified Multi-Asset Class Fund, or DMAC. So I'm going to say DMAC for that.
Rolls off the tongue.
Yeah, so they helped set that up, and it was launched in 2022. And it's a pooled fund that BC municipalities with long-time reserves can now have a wider range of investment income in. Burnaby started with an investment of 350 million that they put in at first. Then in a few months later, the markets were down, and so they took advantage of that and actually put in an extra 50 million. And today, their holdings are now 459 million. That was the fund that performed better than expected last year. They were expecting an $11 million return from these DMAC holdings, but instead they got more than double at $26.78 million. And that was one of the big factors in them coming out with so much more money last year than before. What happens with that, though, is what he explained to me is that this isn't a year-over-year thing that they look at. This is a 10-year fund to them. He said, in fact, one of my favorite quotes of his is that it would drive you crazy if you looked at this year-over-year, because sometimes it goes down, sometimes it's up. The city's looking at this over a 10-year term. So as much as that was good news, they're looking at it for the long term. Next year, however, they're forecasting a significant decrease once again, for a number of reasons. For one thing, Burnaby has got 4 major capital projects that are 50% done. And as those bills get paid, the portfolio shrinks. There's all kinds of other factors too, including the war in Iran, the oil crisis, low interest rates. So those are other things that'll impact it. So for next year, they are expecting a $71 million return, which is much lower than this year.
So we won't expect city staff to be driving around in Lamborghinis and Porsches. So I also know that there's a story about budgets from New West this week.
Yeah. No sooner have we finished the 2026 budget when the city's already looking ahead to 2027. What they reported on Monday was that they are going to be doing their Ipsos survey, which they've done in the past, but they really want to try to get more input this year. The results from the last one that was done in 2024, they did a direct mail survey, and They did a random sampling of 10,000 residential addresses, and of those 10,000, 721 people completed the survey. And then they did send it out to 1,780 brick and mortar business addresses, and they got a lowly 28 responses. So that's 1.6% of their businesses. So this year they're upping it. They're going to send the survey out to more residences and more businesses with the hope that they can really bump up that number. Council says that, this is information that's very useful in terms of trying to determine the priorities of community members and businesses when they are developing the budget. So that will be going out. They did not say when, but they'll be getting that out to the business community and the residences. And they're also extending the amount of time that they will have to respond. So this time there will be a 4-week window that they'll have a chance to kind of provide that feedback. And everybody loves budgets, so you just know that it's going to.
Well, one thing I know that everybody does love is farmers markets. So, Mario, we have an interesting story about what's happening in Port Moody around the farmers market there.
Yeah, last August or September, I believe, the Grow Local Society that manages the farmers market in Port Moody and Coquitlam was advised by the city that the spot they currently run a summer and winter market which is the parking lot of the recreation complex in Port Moody, would no longer be available to them there. There's just so much demand for the services at the recreation complex that they need the parking. So that sort of sent the Grow Local people on a bit of a scramble looking for a new home. They were advised that they'd have to vacate that location at the end of the winter season, which is coming up. And things weren't looking good. There are a lot of sites were looked at, such as the TransLink parking lot for the SkyTrain. Moody Center, SkyTrain, and West Coast Express Station, some other vacant properties. I mean, Port Moody's a small city. There's not a lot of open spots, and a thing like a farmer's market has very specific needs. There has to be a washroom with the capability to have a washroom facility nearby. There has to be parking. There has to be accessible to people that may not get there by car. And the spot that they have, it meets all those expectations. So, council this week recommended they put the market temporarily on the old fire hall site. It's a pretty significant property at the corner of Murray Street and Ioko Road that's been vacant since I think 2014 when the city built a new fire hall, and they've also agreed to that the city's also building a temporary basketball court on that property, just to kind of activate it while they figure out what's going to go in there. There's been a number of development proposals over the years. There's been some other strange proposals like a petting zoo for there. And in 2018, during the civic election, a referendum, the voters rejected the idea of developing that site for mixed-use development that could include a seniors residence and a new library. The library came back last fall with their report, their vision report for growth to 2050. Then they want to have a library on that site because, again, it's a prominent location right near City Hall, right at a very busy intersection. A lot of traffic goes past there. So, yeah, the report recommended that the farmers market move there temporarily until they find a more permanent location or something gets done with that property.
Great. Well, thank you, Mario. And Teresa, I know that the farmers market in New West has just opened for the season.
Yeah, they kicked off on March 26th, and so we're going into the third week already. More than 50 vendors at the market at Tipperary Park every Thursday until October 29th, and that one runs from 3 to 7 p.m. One of the things that is new at the market this year it's a return from something from the past, is they're going to be routinely having cooking demonstrations. So the market manager, Emily Godet, when I spoke with her, she encourages folks to check on their website. It's not going to be every week, so check on their website and find out when those are going to be happening, because she said that vendors are going to be sharing some trade secrets and family recipes. And what that really means is more extravagant samples for the folks that are at the markets on those days. So sounds pretty yummy.
So that's farmers markets continuing from now until October and through the summer. But also this summer, it sounds like there's a prospect of water costing more in Burnaby. Cornelia, do you want to tell me about that?
Well, it's not going to cost more yet, but they're on a path for it to cost possibly more, possibly less. I guess it depends on how much water you use. At Burnaby's March 24th council meeting, council approved a $4.2 million for the first phase of a universal water metering project, which will move the city towards pay-per-use billing. So residents currently pay a flat rate, but in 2024, City Council approved a plan to go towards this universal water metering. What's going to happen in this first phase is, and it's a multi-million-dollar plan, is 5,500 homes with utility boxes with room for these meters that have already been installed during the city's sewer upgrade work. So while they were doing that, they also stuck in these standard utility boxes that have room for these water meters. So they're going to install those there. And then after that, they're going to install them in 500 properties that have secondary suites. So all told, that'll be that 4.2 million affects 6,000 properties. People are going to be warned. There's a communications plan apparently, but the boxes are, I believe, at the property line. So it's not like going to be super intrusive for them to go in. That's my understanding from the council meeting. At first, the data is only going to be data that's going to be collected by the city. They're looking at ways to make that also available to residents so they can track their own water usage, but they won't be moving to pay for use billing until 2027. That was the original plan, but it seems like this might be a little behind schedule. So, but 2027 was the plan. Now, not everybody is on board with this. Well, first of all, the background I should tell you is that one of the reasons they moved towards this metering idea is that Burnaby pays about well over $30 million to Metro Vancouver for bulk water purchases. And in a report, it says that the flat rate use effectively, quote, effectively subsidizes high consumption. So going to pay for use is like the more you use, the more you pay, the less you use, the less you pay. However, not all the councillors on board are on board. Pietro Calandino, he doesn't believe that, he doesn't think that water metering will make a big difference to people's water usage. The people who can afford to waste water will waste it. The people who can't will not, and they will have to pay for it if they can't, and even though they can't afford it. He also questioned the idea whether we have a water shortage, given that we have all these atmospheric rivers. Councillor Sav Dhaliwal opposed the plan for a different reason. He pointed out that over the next 5 years, the city's going to be paying $40 million for this, and he argued that the city's per capita water use are lower than at least one municipality listed in the report that had water meters. So he thinks the money could be better spent in a different way. He also warned that maybe families, if we go to water metering, there'll be families who say, kids, you can't have a bath tonight because we can't afford to pay for it, which I thought was maybe a bit overblown. Now, as Councillor Daniel Tetreault pointed out, they were re-debating things that they'd already talked about in December 2024 when they approved this original plan. He said that Metro Vancouver reports and other data that they'd looked at shows that water meters lower usage rates by water consumption by 65% is what he said. And he said that water meters are one tool to conserve water and it should be used. The measure passed with Dhaliwal, Calandino, and Councillor Richard Lee opposing. So get ready for some water meters in the city, but you won't have to pay for anything until 2027 at least.
And it doesn't sound like the politicians are going to throw this off as water under the bridge.
Nice.
I couldn't resist that. But speaking of politicians, seems like the election season is continuing to heat up. And I know it's been heating up initially in New West with some mayoral candidate declarations, Theresa.
Yeah, last night I attended an event at a pizzeria in downtown New West where Patrick Johnstone announced that he would be seeking a second term as New Westminster's mayor. It was a big crowd. I really wasn't sure what to expect. When I had attended the New Westminster Progressives campaign launch in last September, Daniel Fontaine, when he was announced as their candidate, there was music and it was very much like a big one of those kinds of political gatherings that you would see on TV for a major political party. So I wasn't quite sure what to expect with Patrick's announcement. A lot more folks than I actually thought would be there. Everybody seems very keen for the campaign to begin, and a lot of talk about the need for them to keep the momentum going that's been building at City Hall, they say. Yeah, so and then the Community First New West will be having its nomination meeting at the beginning of May, at which time they will decide on the rest of their slate of candidates for city council and school board. I'm expecting that not everybody on council is going to be seeking reelection, although that has not been confirmed just yet.
Any more election candidacy festivities throughout Burnaby and the Tri-Cities?
I talked to Marcel Marcellet, who is the BCA president in Burnaby, that's the Burnaby Citizens Association, and got a bit of an update about the school trustee race that's heating up over there. And they have had their nomination for the BCAA, and there are three of their incumbents who will not be seeking reelection. Gary Wong, he topped the polls in 2022, and he was also, he's a five-term school trustee. Peter Check, who's on his second term on the board, and then Michael Sasakamoose, who was elected in 2022 when she became the first Indigenous person ever to be elected to political office in Burnaby. So those three are definitely not running. I haven't been able to reach out to Larry Hayes, who is, I think he's now in his seventh term as a school trustee over in Burnaby. He was part of the BCA slate, but Marcel tells me that he had actually resigned from the party a couple of years ago. So I'm not sure what his status is for the next election. So there is definitely going to be some change coming to the makeup of the Burnaby School Board, which currently is, other than Larry Hayes, BCA dominated.
Well, Larry, if you're listening, reach out to Theresa and let her know. So now I'm going to turn to our Freshet 911 section where we talk about encounters people have had with emergency services this week. And Janice, I know you have a story for us.
Bit of a mystery story for the Coquitlam Mounties. In January, somebody walked down to Port Coquitlam, right to the main drag there on Shaughnessy, and injured somebody. It was the RCMP, they call it a stranger assault. We don't know what kind of weapon was used. We don't know how the person is doing, what kind of gender they are, how old they are. But we do know this victim was rushed to hospital with serious but not life-threatening injuries. I've been trying to get some more information about this, but the RCMP are not releasing a lot of information. The interesting part about this is they just released a second image of the suspect this week, and their clothing is quite distinct. The person, the man, was wearing a blue and purple tie-dyed hoodie, and it's very distinct, wearing a mask that covers the face. And they have had no leads on who this person is, who came down from Coquitlam, walked down the main drag at, almost noon and injured somebody and then walked away. And they walked towards Port Coquitlam to the north side up by the river, and police are stumped. So that was the big story from Coquitlam RCMP this week. It's the release of the second photo, hoping for people to recognize the clothing that this person was wearing and giving them a call, hopefully to track this person down.
Yeah, and I think you have those photos on the website, right?
We do, yeah.
Yeah, so take a look at Janice's story, and if you recognize anybody, notify the RCMP, right?
Couple RCMP, yes.
Okay, great. Now I want to turn to sports. And Mario, you have a couple of great stories this week. Maybe you want to start with the one about a new era beginning for New Westminster baseball.
Yeah, with the start of the Major League Baseball season, it seemed appropriate to try and find some kind of baseball coverage. And New Westminster Baseball has long been affiliated with Little League. Their Little League affiliation goes back to 1952. I'm sure many people are familiar with the Little League World Series. And a few years ago, Coquitlam Little League actually sent a team to that World Series in Williamsport. So it's a pretty high-profile event. The New West Association is pretty small and never gets to that level of competition. And they've switched over the years. They've had times where they've been with Little League. They've had times with them when they've been affiliated with BC Minor Baseball Association. In fact, New Westminster Baseball helped found the BC Minor Baseball Association in 1963. So it was decided over the winter that they would go back to BC Minor Baseball. And Cav Whiteley, who's a coach in New West Baseball, and he's also the vice president. He was sort of the spearhead behind this. I'll full disclosure, my son played baseball in New Westminster Little League a few years ago, and Cav was his coach, and he gave the kids a really good experience. He's very well regarded as a coach. He's coached at the He's coached the Durham or the Douglas College baseball team for several years. He's coached at the provincial and national level as well. But he really does a lot of work for the kids, and he really believes in building a love for baseball for the kids more so than feeding competition and going for wins. And talking to him, he said, BC Minor Baseball Association has a lot more supports in place for coaches and umpires to give that good experience for everybody. So that was sort of the driving force behind this move to go back to a BC Minor Baseball affiliation. I know my son is now umpiring, and under Little League he got an evening of training, and under BC Minor Baseball they're due for a full day of training coming up in the near future. So hopefully that will educate umpires a little bit better, give them a little more tools to call a game properly, and that will filter down all through the levels of the kids playing as well, and the coaches having more workshops to guide them in how to coach and give the kids a good experience.
That sounds fantastic. And I know your second story is about baseball as well.
Well, I did a story several years ago about a Port Coquitlam pitcher. He used to pitch at the University of British Columbia, and he was drafted in 2016, I believe, by the Arizona Diamondbacks. He's a big kid, Curtis Taylor. He's 6'6" tall, a very powerful pitcher. And I remember talking to him back then, and he was quite excited about starting his or getting going on his major league career. And it's never quite happened for him. He's now 30 years old, and he's had quite the tour of baseball outposts. The most recent, he's landed in Korea, and he's now pitching in the Korea Baseball Organization. He had his first start the other day, the second game of the season for the NC Dinos that play in Changwon. And he did quite well. He pitched three scoreless innings to start. So, I every once in a while I'll just drop in on the Google and find out what's going on with Curtis Taylor. And it's quite interesting now that he's in Korea to read Korean coverage of him. They seem quite excited. Of course, in baseball and in countries like Korea and Japan, they're restricted on how many import players they can bring in. But they have in Korea, there's a certain amount of money they can spend on contracts for import players. So he's one of their import pitchers. So they have big hopes. They like his size and the power of his pitching. He was pitching in Memphis last year with the AAA affiliate of the St. Louis Cardinals, and had quite a good season. He's had some injuries, battled some injury problems over the years. But like I say, he's had quite a tour, and I think I first caught up with him when he was pitching for a team called the Montgomery Biscuits. And when you go through his resume of teams he's played for, it pretty much covers every corner of the United States, the Midwest, the East, and New Hampshire. He was there for a while. He was in Iowa. He was in St. Paul, and he even played a season and a little bit in Mexico. So now he's got a year-long contract in Korea, and he's doing quite well.
Wow, an international star.
Well, I think we always think of athletes achieving the top of their sport. The player who goes on to play in the NHL. But I'm quite fascinated about these athletes who don't quite make it there, but they can still make a good living. You can the contract that Curtis Taylor signed will pay him $900,000 if he achieves all his bonuses. You hear of hockey players who go over to Europe. A few years ago, I did a story about a Port Moody kid who was over playing hockey in Germany and started singing the national anthem, is now a country western singer. He actually got onto a TV show, kind of like Germany's Most Talented, and wowed the judges and got in a couple of rounds. And so I really enjoy those stories because it shows there are careers to be made if you stick with it and are resilient and are willing to take some chances. And you can see the world, you can make a good living, and you're playing the sport you love.
Oh, that's inspiring. I like that. Nothing about podcasters from British Columbia who end up doing something weird in different parts of the world?
Not yet.
All right. Well, on that note, I wanted to talk about what's on this Easter weekend. Janet.
Now we've got a long weekend and it's going to be crazy for the weather. We're going to start out at 4 degrees on Friday, and on Easter Monday, or it's going to be 20 degrees. Dress appropriately. There are lots of Easter egg hunts everywhere at Burnaby, Westminster, and the Tri Cities. So get out and bring the families. Some of them require pre-registration. Some of them are free. It's a whole bunch. I do want to circle one thing that goes live tomorrow, Saturday, and that's the online auction to raise money for the Charlene Reevely Children's Charity. It's very near and dear to my heart. And the auction opens up, it runs, sorry, April 4th to the 15th. If you don't know Charlene Reevely, she was killed in a car accident along with another woman more than 10 years ago, sort of right in front of Riverview on a low heat highway. And she was killed by a drunk driver. She had 4 children. And the money raised from the online auction goes to help grieving families, the children left behind. And it's a very worthy cause. So I wanted to promote that. And I also wanted to promote the show at the Evergreen Cultural Center on Saturday. Is by Molly Wilson. She is a graduate of the Grant McEwen University, which is well known for its musical theater, and she's just a delight. She comes from Chilliwack, and she's booked 3 shows throughout this year at the Evergreen Cultural Center. And check out Molly Wilson. She's got her comedy cabaret happening on the 4th.
That sounds fantastic. Well, now we're going to turn to your favorite stories of the week. So, who wants to go first? Okay, Janice.
I'll go first. A filmmaker who grew up in Burnaby and now lives in Coquitlam. He graduated from Centennial Secondary and he's traveled around the world. He's done documentaries for the BBC and he is back now in Canada. And on Thursday, he had The Nature of Things screened his documentary. It's about the conservation of cheetahs in South Africa. And he is doing great work and he's back home. And his next project, if you can believe it, is going to be on black bears and how they are roaming around the Tri Cities, and that's his next big project. So he was lots of fun to talk to.
Oh, that sounds great. Who else?
I would say that my favorite story of the week was probably doing one about the Transgender Day of Visibility, which was on March 31st. I had the pleasure of speaking with Rafa Ferreira from the New West Pride Society, and we chatted about how important this is for the community. There was 2 events that were held. One was a market and it had 24 vendors. Another was a live music presentation. And then at Monday's council meeting, Naomi Perks, a local mom here who she comes to council every year and speaks to the importance of recognizing Transgender Day of Visibility here in New West and thanks the city for it. She says that municipal leadership plays a powerful role in shaping whether people feel safe and included in their community. And yeah, so listening to a mom who's, she's passionate about this and speaking with Rafa, it was probably my favorite story of the week. Other than that, I will say very quickly, if I can, that one of my favorite stories of the week is the stories that didn't happen because April 1st, April Fool's Day, back in days of past, newspapers used to publish April Fool's stories with the websites being what they are nowadays. Things can travel very quickly. A paper that I worked at once did a story about a Ferris wheel going up on the waterfront in New Westminster, and City Hall was inundated with phone calls from people wondering when the Ferris wheel was coming. But a couple of the things that I did see online today were quite caught my attention. Douglas College is apparently building a giant slide and an outdoor ball pit, and
I like that.
yeah. Oh, it looks if you go to their Facebook page, you can see a photo of it. It's quite entertaining. And New Westminster Councillor Nadine Nakagawa posted something about a giant or a goat pen down on the waterfront. So, as someone who finds goat totally adorable, I'm on board with that one. So those were my favorite stories that didn't happen.
How about you, Mario?
My favorite story hasn't even happened yet. Just as baseball season's starting up, hockey season is getting into the playoffs, and the Coquitlam Express are playing the Chilliwack Chiefs tonight in the first game of their best-of-7 first-round BC Hockey League series. Those 2 teams are old rivals. They met twice previously in recent years, Chilliwack winning both of those series, and those teams played each other 7 times this year. The last time they played was last Sunday when it was the last game of the season for both teams with second place in their division and home ice advantage in their series at stake. And the Express got throttled. And so I went down on Wednesday and talked to Jeff Wagner, the Express coach, to see how, that might impact the team's attitude going into this showdown with their Fraser Valley rivals. And he was quite blunt about it. He said he hopes that game was the kick in the butt his players need to kind of get on the right track and give the Chiefs a good fight. So we'll see how it goes. The first game is tonight in Chilliwack. The second game is Saturday in Chilliwack, and then the series comes back to Coquitlam for games 3 and 4 on Monday and Wednesday.
Well, that may be the only playoff hockey we get for a while. So
And it's
Cornelia.
showing that the team is actually
Well,
drawing. Oh, sorry. We
No, go
want to
ahead,
do that
Maria.
now.
no, go ahead.
It's showing the team is actually drawing really well. They're getting crowds of 1,300, 1,600 fans, which is quite a boost from a few years ago when you'd get friends and family of about 300 people rattling around in the foyer.
Wow, that's a good crowd. And Cornelia.
Well, I've already talked enough about it, but it was really fun being able to talk to the city's treasury services director, and to really be able to, because we don't often get to unpack the sort of dense data of certain numbers and budget stories. So to have somebody be able to walk you through the history of things, I love I love having access like that. So thank you, Doug Spindler. But that's I've talked enough about that. One of the favorite things I did this week is talk to Burnaby's Citizen of the Year, Joanne Morgan, who it was announced sort of on a city agenda. They haven't officially awarded it to her yet, but it was sort of announced when they released in-camera decisions that they made. So I got to talk to her, and she was just a delight. She's a super volunteer. She has volunteered for about 10 years, puts in hours and hours every week helping seniors, driving them to lunches. She helped re-up the coffee bar at the seniors center at Confederation. And she's a retired nurse, and she gives that retired nurse energy, very down to earth, very no nonsense, but very friendly. Can't wait to write that story. It'll be fun.
I like that. The retired nurse energy. That's very cool.
Well, nurse energy, not just retired nurse energy. They just have
Well, are they
a this
different?
well, maybe they're just happier, so they can use all of the good skills and personality traits they had as a nurse, and now they're just more relaxed.
Right. And maybe a less tired.
Yeah, less tired. Maybe that's what it is. Less tired.
Well, I have to say my favorite story of the week was the editorial we had on the opinion page about the visit that Janis and Mario had to Ottawa. I know we talked about that in a previous podcast, but the whole thing was speaking up for Canadian media. I think continues to be inspiring. So thank you both again for that. So with that, thanks again to our team for their great insights on this week's stories, and to all of you for listening. Don't forget to pick up your copy of our latest print edition at your favorite recreation centers, grocery stores, coffee shops, city halls, and other Freshet News distribution points. We now come out in print twice a month, and our next edition is out on April 16th. And we do, of course, produce news every day on the freshetnews.ca website, and we kick off the week with our Sunday email newsletter. And, of course, we wrap up the week here on our Freshet Friday podcast. Have a fantastic Easter weekend, everyone, and we'll see you back here next Friday.